All right. Well, thanks for being here, everyone. Appreciate you joining us on time this afternoon. I think evening for many of you as well. So appreciate this time and this conversation. We have a very special guest with us today. This is our second convening of the year, and we're so thrilled to welcome Tammy as part of this conversation. As I mentioned, I think earlier, I've shared Tammy's bio with you all and kind of given you a lot of context and some of the work that Tammy has been leading over 15 years as CEO at She's the First, and now with the merger with Girl Rising, which we'll talk a little bit more about today as well. But I first learned about Tammy's work maybe in 2021. I was collaborating with Kristen Brand, and they co-founded She's the First. And so I'd heard about this incredible organization, She's the First, and the work that they've done globally in Latin America. At that time, I'd learned about some of the work in Latin America and East Africa and South Asia, now globally as well. And I was just so inspired by a couple of young people coming together and really having a clear vision for what they wanted to achieve. And now, like all these years later, to have followed some of the work and the growth, and now this merger, which again we'll talk more about, is really inspiring. And I think in social impact world, you don't get to oftentimes follow a journey of someone because it's yeah, either you've like not met someone or you don't know much about their story, but I've been lucky to have met Tammy a couple of times and kind of observed from afar. So this feels like a conversation I've wanted to have for a couple of years, and so I'm honored to have you with us. Thanks, Tammy, for joining us for this hour with this incredible community as well.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks everyone for making the time.
Super. So we've got an hour together with Tammy. We're going to jump right into the conversation. The first half an hour or so, Andrea and I will take turns asking some questions that we've prepared ahead of time, and then we would love for the rest of this group to actually jump in and ask some questions about some of the work that you're doing. Where are you kind of feeling stuck? Do you have any questions that are more general? So that's going to be the kind of flow for the second half of this. Before we get started with questions, what we like to do is just give our guests a bit of context on who's in the room. So if you can just put in, your organization and what it does in just a sentence, I think that'll give Tammy some context around who she's speaking with today. So feel free to do that. Also, if you have internet capacity, we'd love to have you on camera so we can see folks as well. And then we'll get started. So I'll give folks just a minute to put in their quick bio on the chat. All right. Well, we'll get started, and as folks put in their context, Tammy, you'll be able to like learn a bit more about the room as well, and also during the Q&A that we'll have afterwards. And if you see people joining in, sometimes we have folks trickling in a little bit later, so might have folks kind of joining as well. All right. Well, we'll get started. I'll kick off with the first question. So, Tammy, you've built She's the First for over 15 years now. I think it's actually now over 15. And you've grown it from an organization as a startup nonprofit to becoming an organization with a pretty massive budget in the social impact space. I believe the last number was about 13 million or maybe more.
Oh,
And
that's
that,
cumulative, not
oh,
annual.
okay, so
We're
that's
still
cumulative.
relatively small. Yeah,
Um,
about 1.5 million annually
okay, super helpful.
USD.
Which is significant. I think most nonprofits don't cross the million
Mhm.
figure in an annual year as well. And then, of course, impacted hundreds of thousands of girls around the world and their livelihoods. And so, and then now eventually has led to a merger with Girl Rising as well, which we'll talk about. But just looking back at the 15-year kind of journey, what do you see as maybe one or two essential ingredients that made all of this possible for you at She's the First?
Mhm. I mean, it's definitely the people. You already mentioned my co-founder, Kristen Brandt, um, especially those peers of mine who, at the very early stages, the first year, the first few years, who stepped up before it was um, a well-known organization, before we even had adequate funding to pay salaries. Myself, my co-founder, Kristen Brandt, she and I met when we were in our early 20s through a scholarship program. We received scholarships ourselves on our quest to be first generation university graduates, then studying communications and journalism. We had a friend named Kate Lord who came in early on, and she became our director of communications ultimately. And she's a photojournalist by training. So from the very beginning, we had such beautiful visuals and stories of the girls and the community partners we were working with. And we took an approach of having girls tell their own stories and doing so with dignity and really modeling what values-based communication looks like. If you remember, at least speaking from a US perspective, 15, 20 years ago, I think nonprofits have come a long way even in that time. But when we started out, there was still a lot of storytelling that not even the biggest nonprofits were doing that weren't really capturing the dignity of the humans they served. What poverty porn, whatever you want to call it, just showing, especially children, um, looking, in tattered clothing and things just to make donors want to feel bad and to give. And from the very beginning, we took a different approach of showing girls as being strong and capable and knowing what they needed and the importance of listening to their voices and centering them. And then in 2020, the year that all of our world started to fall apart even more because of the pandemic, Kate Kiyama entered the picture. She ultimately became my co-CEO. Before that was director of programs at She's the First. And before that worked for one of the community-based organizations in Kenya, with whom we started something called the Girls First Summit. And if you're in the girls empowerment rights space in East Africa, and especially in Kenya, you probably know about that or know of Kate. And we gave her a job offer right as the pandemic was happening, and she so bravely accepted it despite all of the uncertainty and became our first hire outside of the US and then built up our presence in Kenya, establishing a Kenyan entity of She's the First. And between her and Kristen, like it's really their vision that shaped and built the programs that I've had the privilege of being able to storytell and fundraise for over the years. It wouldn't have been possible. My success would not have been possible without theirs. And their success was only possible because of the approach they took, which was shifting power to the girls and the women mentors and community leaders that we serve, because every decision they made was always guided by their input and voices.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, I think oftentimes we think of like program people, revenue as kind of these three big pillars that we come back to quite a bit when we talk about nonprofits. And I guess like the tendency is like, oh, our program is unique, or like, oh, we've raised a lot of money. But what you're saying truly is the people actually who make that happen, right? You could raise a lot of money and don't have the right people who are actually going to drive that work forward. It becomes quite tricky. And the intentionality behind which you've built that team for the first person, who I believe was also called Kate, right? So the photojournalist who joined you like at the very beginning to now having kind of this co-CEO model, it shows the intentionality behind the growth as well.
Yeah.
Super. I know we want to talk a little bit more around some of this reflection in the next question. I'll pass it to Andrea for this one. But yeah, thanks for answering.
Yeah, thank you, Abby. Yeah, talking about being a CEO, you've been at this position for quite a long time now. And now with the merger, slowly things are shifting. What three lessons do you kind of find yourself returning to and want to share with the group?
Mhm. Yeah, well, I mean, I've been doing this work for 16, almost 17 years. Maybe some of you have been doing your work for even longer, or less amount of time. It doesn't really matter. I think you can be in your first year of something and have just as much wisdom as I do. So I don't think I'm going to share anything in my answer that's like groundbreaking that you've never heard about before, but hopefully it just validates that um, the wisdom you already have and to trust that. Um, when I look back, I think trusting, I've learned to trust my gut, especially as a young leader throughout my late 20s and even my 30s. I doubted myself quite a bit. So I guess that's the piece with hindsight that I could look back on and see decisions that I wish I would have made differently. But I think always had, this little quiet voice inside telling me at the time, oh, I don't, that might not be the best decision. But I let someone else who had a louder voice or a more confident voice. And because I really like to build consensus. That's a great quality to have, but sometimes it means that you can override um, your own gut instincts about something. So I guess that's the one piece of wisdom that I've earned with age. Now that I'm 40 now, I think that one took me a while to get. But from a very young age, I would say I knew that everything, a mantra that I have, everything is figure outable. I borrowed that from one of my mentors and role models. There's this author, Marie Forleo, who wrote a book, that's her title. And it's just this philosophy that you might not know something at the very beginning, but you can surround yourself with people and resources to figure it out. You just need to have patience and also a little bit of vulnerability to not act like you know everything, but rather be open about what you don't know. And every time I've done that, I have attracted the people or the resources to solve it. I'm very much an open book in that regard, um, because I think if we don't surface the needs that we have, we're not able to get the help we need. And then I've also embraced the wisdom and the philosophy of taking things one step at a time. It's really easy to be overwhelmed on a daily basis, but I have tried to break down these big goals into smaller steps and make time to. I mean, I like to actually cross them off in my little planner because it brings me more joy to do that psychologically, but also making time for reflection or journaling, monthly at the very least, so that I can appreciate the progress that has been made because it's all too easy to keep getting more inbound assignments and tasks, and then you forget what you actually accomplished because you're always focusing on what still needs to be done.
Thank you, Tammy. I find these super valuable. And I like how you mentioned at the beginning that like the time that you've been doing this doesn't matter, that you might not say something groundbreaking. While I agree, I think that it's super special when we're able to like hear these lessons, because sometimes we just go on our day to day and like even though we know kind of that we're following our gut, we don't really like pay attention to the lesson behind. And I think a lot of people here value what you just said and might actually be able to like implement them more into their daily life. So thank you for sharing. Abby,
For
do you have a
sure.
next question?
Yes. Yeah, I have so many questions on this figure outable. It's a great concept. I will definitely look up Mary Forleo. I think I just wrote that down. I'm curious about this because we talk a lot about going back to like the beginner's mindset. Like, how do you figure things out and how do you like accept or are vulnerable that after doing something for 10 years, 20 years, whatever timeline, you still have a lot more to learn. And I think that's something that we try to do with these convenings as well. But I think something we're always thinking about at Little Big Fund. Um, I want to talk a little bit about this merger. I've mentioned this maybe like three times already, so I want to jump into this. That must have been a big moment. I've personally been following it, and I've been thinking a lot about like nonprofits working together and going from a place of competition to collaboration. And it seems like, and again, I know that this is still like an ongoing process, but it seems like this was a big moment for She's the First. It's also a big moment for Girl Rising. As you think back from this period when you started, and I think in our conversation you told me maybe it was a year or longer process when you started from like that initial conversation. Is there a particular like insight from this experience of like merging nonprofits that you've learned that you completely didn't know when you started the process?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had such a positive merger experience. It's kind of funny because prior to January of 2025, I never really thought about mergers as a strategy for growth. Honestly, I just don't think I had the exposure to it. I don't have business school training. I'm sure that there are, when you do, there's probably entire courses on mergers and acquisitions as a strategy for growth. But I do have a memory of maybe 5 or 6 years back, someone raising the question about mergers and acquisitions in my sector of, I'm just speaking to 501(c)(3)s in the US. I hope this is translatable to NGOs registered in other countries. But speaking for the 501(c)(3)s in the US, I remember a woman saying, why aren't we thinking about merging them? And I I remember my response to that comment at the time. It was like I was like, oh, why would we do that? Like I saw it as a very undesirable road to take, a road that might indicate failure, that you couldn't do it on your own. And that was just not even like a logical response. It was kind of like an emotional one. And I'm like, gosh, somewhere deep inside of us, it's been ingrained that if you join forces or if you dissolve your entity to join forces with another, that it means you were unsuccessful. And that is so wrong. It's like that's not the case. And in fact, while there are mergers that do happen out of desperation, and that is going to be happening more and more in our sector, and again, that's not a bad thing. If that is how the work and the programs continue, then that is the responsible thing to do. I'm sure it is much more stressful and emotionally difficult to navigate an organization through that kind of a crisis. In my case, She's the First was at a position of strength, as was Girl Rising when we made this decision. And that made it, I think it made us more clear-headed in that we were making long-term decisions from a place of what felt like it was best for the mission and for the girls in the communities we serve. Um, and I'm really proud that when the opportunity to just join a conversation last January with two other CEOs around how, just broadly, how could we support each other through this crisis that is in the sector and nonprofits are facing as funding is just disappearing and how the loss of foreign aid is disrupting the whole sector. Um, we kind of just when mergers came up, I didn't feel an aversion to them anymore. I think maybe that's another thing that just came the wisdom of growing in those last 5 years of seeing other organizations aren't my competition. Like we're actually complementary of one another and we can become a greater force to be reckoned with if we come together and unify our strengths. Um, and it helped that with Girl Rising, I had known the organization since its founding, and I had known its CEO and respected and trusted her a lot. Um, and we were just completely transparent with each other on this is how our organizations work. This is every funder we have. Like we just bared it all. There were no surprises, no skeletons in the closet, as they say. And um, it just it's the experience I wish for every organization that's exploring a merger. Our boards were very cooperative and supportive. Um, I had fears that our funders, given um, it was me, by the way, who felt that it made the most strategic sense to go under Girl Rising's name and 501(c)(3 um, for a couple of reasons. Like one, they have some government relationships in Kenya and India that would have been difficult to um, navigate through a name change, I think. And they also had um, a higher number of major donors who I think a name change would have been disruptive to. Whereas with the She's the First community, while I did fear some people would be sad that our brand wouldn't exist on its own, um, that not a single donor ended up telling me that they were leaving or calling it quits. So um, when we painted the picture of the impact we would have together and how the She's the First programs and team and name would live on within a new Girl Rising organization, every single person I spoke to, their eyes lit up and got excited. And I was like, wow, at the end of the day, of course, nobody's here to build a brand. They're here to create the transformation in girls' lives and communities. And um, I was so pleasantly surprised that those fears I had about around the branding did not actually become an obstacle. Granted, I think we also were really smart in how we communicated it, and the way we announced our merger was so true to our mission. We started with the girls within our organization and convening a focus group of girls, our Girls Advisory Council. We rolled out the news on International Day of the Girl. And I had spoken with every major funder and every member of our community, at least who checks their email, had a heads up before it was public. So we really brought our community along on the journey, and they're excited to grow with us.
Super. And yeah, it's so important to like, especially what you said about the girl advisory committee and like engaging the participants that like essentially the largest community that you have, right, that you work with, and engaging them in that conversation does allow for a lot more clarity and like, is this the right fit as well? We also oftentimes talk about how, especially when it's a purpose-driven board or purpose-driven organization, having purpose at the core of everything you do means that some of the other elements become almost like logistical things that you can figure out as long as like purpose is clear between the organization and values, of course. I think those two have to go along with each other as well. So appreciate you sharing this. I guess maybe one follow-up, and then I'll pass to Andrea on this one was there a particular moment you mentioned the fear around donors, maybe like not like wanting to continue or kind of questions from there. Was there any other like challenge that you were like, oh, this was a tough part of that process, whether it's regulatory or
Mhm.
yeah, any other places where you're like, oh, this is something that's actually tricky about a merger that you hadn't thought about before you started the
Yeah.
process?
The hardest part for me is because I told you, like, I'm an open book. I'm a very transparent person. As a leader, exploring a merger or a big change like that, you do have to keep it secretive up until a point. It is not going to be beneficial for your organization if everyone on staff starts freaking out over high levels of anxiety around their futures before you have all the answers. You'll never have all the answers. So at a certain point, for us, it was the point of knowing um, we want to do this and our boards support it. And that was I think around May that we got to that point. So I had to keep it under wraps from the staff between January through May, and that was really my co-CEO and I. And we let some members of our senior leadership team know, but even then, there is a high level of anxiety for staff through a change like this, even around things that you, as the leader who knows like what you're safeguarding, and you see the big picture, and you're like, these are not things to worry about. Like, it is human nature that your team members who aren't in that power decision-making seat like you are are going to have some anxieties and fears that are out of proportion to what it could be. This isn't an exact example from our experience, but it could be something around, how many vacation days are they going to get in the new organization? Like these are small things that you're like, that's not going to change. Like, but for an employee, like that is huge for them. And like all these other things, these small details that affect their day-to-day life, you have to like really be sensitive to how you manage the communication around that. Um, and it was really, we got really good at communicating in the second half of the year once um, there was more clarity around the plans. But it was just hard for me to not be transparent because that's such a key value of mine. But it's one of those tricky situations where you have to weigh what is, if you were fully transparent, you could actually be creating some unnecessary upheaval that will negatively impact your programs and mission.
Super. Yeah, such a fine line. And I imagine the anxiety you must have had kind of balancing that for months, I assume, between like the conversation with the board and the partner, and then also with the team. So yeah, appreciate you sharing that so transparently and openly as well. A big learning for sure. Andrea, do you want to ask one more question, and then I know we'll open up for the group to ask questions as well.
Yes, thank you, Abby. So this is a little bit of a different lane, but I heard you say competitors before, how we sometimes see other nonprofits as competitors. And usually we also encourage the ventures or the leaders that we work with to kind of set themselves apart, be unique, because you are kind of competing, even whether that is for funding or partnerships or just visibility. Um, Even though you're working kind of in the same arena, education and girls. But how do you, I get the question for you is how do you usually start or lead conversations with organizations that are kind of competitors of yours, whether it is that you want to work with them or just have a conversation?
I mean, I think over the years, I just made it a habit of meeting up for coffee or at various conferences and convenings that most leaders attend, like try to have one-on-one time where you could talk about leader to leader, your strategies and um, just to have an awareness of what each other does. And from there, I found that the leaders who were reciprocating transparency, we grew trust. Over the years, there's probably been one or two leaders that I connected with, and I was like, they're not really openly sharing things with me.
Mm.
Um, and they might just have a mindset of they want to hold their cards closer to their chest. Um, so that didn't allow me to really develop a relationship with them. But the leaders who would be like openly talk about their funders, I would openly talk about our funders because we saw, um, we didn't, we were confident enough that our funders weren't going to like leave us, but instead, with an abundance mindset, we thought, oh, some of our funders actually have some more capacity and can give much more than they're giving to us individually. Does it make sense to team up on a proposal so we can ask for a bigger piece of the pie together? Funders, I found now that we're doing that actively with Girl Rising, they're really excited about those type of proposals. And we successfully got a $250,000 grant in December from a lapsed, she's the first funder, to support the pilot of our integrated model in in Kenya. And that was like so validating of the merger to see that, okay, here's a funder who like is actually going to be funding the integrated work. But the process of putting together the proposal with each other, with the teams from both legacy organizations, was also so rewarding. it would be helpful if more funders encouraged those opportunities and provided resources to um, help create those kind of proposals. Because sometimes you just don't have the time, and working with external collaborators does take more time than working internally with your own team. So I think that can be a roadblock for some people.
Yeah, thank you. And congratulations, by the way. That's amazing. Uh, really much like relate to the validation part. Unfortunately, we do all need that kind of validation. I would just clarify here for everyone listening that you have to be like really, really open and honest, as you mentioned, Tammy, and be willing to have that collaboration conversation, right? Like the transparency part, I think that's super important. We really talk a lot about how you address other people, whether that is a potential partner or just someone you meet on the street, and how you talk to them about what you do, and how you never know where the connection and where like a good opportunity might come from. So I think that it's super special what you're sharing. Thank you. Um, all right. Does anyone in the group want to ask a question for Tammy? I think Abby wrote it in the chat. You can also write down your questions or just come off mute.
Yeah, or like raise your hand. So, oh, there we go.
Oh, Berndizi?
Okay, I thank you very much. The name is Binze. Yeah. Okay, thank you. I've been following very well. I've also had the opportunity while she was talking to me, like while Ken was talking to me, like look at their website and some of the work that they do. And I realized that most of in the part of Africa, their work is concentrated maybe towards South East Africa. I wanted to ask maybe like are they looking for maybe like opportunities of extending or expanding to maybe like countries across West Africa also, and what is required to do that? That's the first question. And my second question is also is around co-founding. I realized also like she's the co-founder of the whole organization. And one of the key areas where dynamics where I'm navigating now is maybe like looking for or working on a co-founder. I also wanted to understand like what did she look for when she was maybe like trying to get a co-founder? What were the criteria or things that she looks for in the co-founder? Yeah, that's basically
Okay. So
Mhm.
I guess like two part, but part one might be a trickier question in terms of like, is there any plans to work in West Africa? But um, yeah, then maybe the second one on your co-founder journey and what that process was like to build a relationship with a co-founder.
Yeah, so for girls in West Africa, we have a pathway for involvement in She's the First Now Girl Rising through our girls leadership programs. So annually, we open up applications for girls to apply for our Girls Advisory Council. And actually, at the end of this call, I'm going to put a video in the chat that features two girls from Nigeria, and they're girls from all over Africa, all over every all 6 continents, not Antarctica, obviously, but all the other continents. We have girls. It's like an open door to participate. Girls get stipends for digital stipends to help them with in places where it's expensive for them to access internet bandwidth. Um, they get the funds so that they can participate in the meetings and be on camera if they are able to. And we also have a fellowship program that I think that's every 18 months. We open up applications for that, and that is open to any girl who can speak either. Actually, that's just in English, but the Girls Advisory Council, we have two. We have one in English and one in Spanish. Um, and then the second part, I think I can best answer it in terms of looking for a co-CEO. Um, in finding my co-founder, I was 23, she was 21. We honestly did not think we would be launching an organization that we would both be working for over a decade. In that case, it was just finding someone who was crazy enough to believe in the big dream and work as hard as you. For a co-CEO, that was what Kate became, and that was done not single-handedly because the board of directors, obviously does the hiring for that. And she went through a interview process with the board and had my support in doing so. Both Kristen and I always saw from when we first hired her the potential for her to grow as a leader in the organization. And I guess we were looking for someone who could be as fluent with funders and be able to hold those kind of high level relationships, as well as be able to be in a training in a rural setting and have the respect of girls and grassroots leaders. And Kate, just that as someone who's a former lawyer, but also like a programs leader, she really complemented the strengths of me or of anyone who would be in the other half of the co-CEO dynamic, which I mean, just generally speaking, you could characterize my skills as being great at the fundraising, the communications, the overall um, operations piece of it. So in that case, it's making sure both leaders have complementary skill sets, and that where you kind of have to have some redundancy is you have to be equally good at the internal leadership pieces, because it's important that your staff sees you both as a united force. Um, so trying to find, I hope that helps. Like maybe thinking of what is if you're one of the co-founders or co-CEOs, what's your job description? And then what is the job description you would write for the other person, so that as you are on the search for them, you're never pressured if like a friend of yours raises their hand and you're like, oh, I don't think they'd be the best person. You can just have it more objectively in writing of the qualities that this person should have. And then if you have a board of directors, they of course would be involved in the interviewing of that candidate. I
Thank
also
you.
don't think you need a co-founder all the time. If it's not organic, honestly, I would focus on, if you're also the CEO, focus on being, I love co-leadership, but it doesn't have to be on both the co-founding and the co-executive level. It could just be on co-CEO or co-executive director.
That also, I think, addresses what Maribel was saying in terms of finding or not being easy to find a co-founder, which yeah, is definitely a tough one.
Yeah,
I
you
think it's
just don't want to force it. It's
yeah,
like you don't want to get married to the wrong person, right? You'll create more problems for
Time.
yourself down the line.
I
yeah,
have today at
for sure.
4, I have a
Ooh,
call.
I think we're
And
getting a background noise. Okay. I think Julia had a question next. I know we want to be mindful of time. So Julia and then Quol.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for being here and sharing. So I appreciate that so much. I am also from the US, and so I add that just for the perspective of my question, which is to say, I don't work in like the girls' space at all. I'm actually with wildlife. But if you were to start a global movement from scratch today, how would you go about it? And assuming you wouldn't start globally, how would you like grow and scale?
Mm. That's
It's a
a
real
really
small
good
question.
question. Because I have no ambition of starting something. I'm a one and done founder. I mean, I've had the opportunity of a lifetime. I've loved everything I've gotten to do. But I don't know. I did so much of it. I was so young that I didn't see my limits. I try to have to take myself back to that younger version of me a lot. Because I think as we get older, we can box ourselves in and become too conservative and cautious. Um, so at that time, I was really embracing social media because it was new. Um, I think if I was to start a movement again from scratch, I would go to young people and basically look for who's the teen or the 23-year-old now who's got a great idea and try to support them. Um, I believe so much in youth-powered movements. She's the first has a program, the Girl-Centered Incubator, that the Little Big Fund, we've hired them to do some boot camps with them. And they're going through a program that is like everything Kristen and I wished we had when we were starting out, to actually teach them how to build and grow a sustainable organization. Yeah, so I think that's what I would do. I would start with um, the youth voice and build capacity around that.
Thanks.
Cool. You're up next.
So much for deeply sharing with us. Really great stuff. I'm really interested in building relationship instead of competition. Not an easy thing, but I think that's what our current situation calls for. So really interesting to hear about the partnership and the merging, which is very interesting. Not oftentimes do you hear about when you ask organizations about the exit strategy, you don't hear about merging as one of the exit strategies. And I think this should be a key thing to encourage. My question is, and I'm sorry if someone had asked earlier, I got pulled a little bit, but it is around the challenges on merging and how you navigate them, and how does it affect your already built relationships? Do you have to, because I know not all the organizations can be at the same levels when it comes to reputation and community relationship. How do you go about this when, because it feels like you're almost starting everything afresh or something, like in my thinking. Would you
Mhm.
like to comment on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for us, well, the good news is there was continuity in our relationships on the ground with girls and community-based organizations are held by our programs team, and not a single member of our programs team was laid off through this merger. So they are going to continue to maintain those relationships. And then for the funding relationship, so the merger linked up with the succession plan for me. So I planned to have 1 year on the staff, which is what I'm living now, and then be off the staff in 2027. In the past 5 years, had been trying to build a fundraising team within She's the First. And I had 3 hires that did not work out. And there was very, turnover within a couple years. They weren't the right people. That's a topic for another time. I have a really hard time with hiring fundraising people in the US. I think there's a lot of broken systems that create high turnover, and that was an awful experience in having to introduce so many of the donors that we've had for a long time to a new person within our own organization. And then that person leaves within a year, and then new person, that person's gone within 2 years. I didn't, we didn't lose donors, but it meant I had to come back. Like I was there to come back and swoop them back in and take care of them again. But it meant like for this merger, it was so exciting to me that Girl Rising had a development team with retention, with really talented, a VP and a director and a manager who have been there for multiple years, don't have plans of leaving, who are just so gracious. And like when I introduce someone to them, like they make that person feel so appreciated. And it's a founder's dream to be able to pass someone on to someone that you trust. And for that reason, I don't have to like stay up awake at night worrying that, funders are going to be neglected and then drop off after I'm no longer on the staff.
Mhm. Very great. Thank you.
Yeah, it's incredible. Just a lot of head shaking because we talk a lot about this in some of our fundraising boot camps about like when do you start hiring, right? And again, most of our participants are early stage to like mid stage, like stages where they're still like maybe the first employee or like have a couple of people but don't have a fundraising team. So like what you shared around like building out that team, but then also knowing the reality of it and like retention of it. A conversation for another day will be to understand how Girl Rising has been able to build that out, but that's for a later time as well. Maybe one question I'll ask, and if anyone else has questions to add, we would love to make space for maybe a couple more before we wrap up. But in the chat, Maribel talks a little bit about rejection, and she talks about reaching out to an organization, getting rejected, and rejection being difficult. Um, in fundraising, we oftentimes talk about rejection and what that means and how do you deal with it. There is a psychological element to it as a founder as well. And so just curious if you talk a little bit about your, um, yeah, like what you've learned around navigating rejection as a founder, whether it's fundraising, whether it's partnership, whether it's, any other type of rejection, but would love to hear a bit more about, yeah, what you've learned over the years.
Yeah, it's really, really hard. I think building that muscle to get back up again after you've been knocked down so many times is something that all of you should be so proud of because I don't think the average person can do that as well as we have to when we're founders and executive directors. So it's always hard. Um, I think I know logically it's a numbers game and that it's the more shots you take, the higher the chance that of, the nine rejections, the 10th one will be a yes. That's like always been the case. But when you're rejected, it's all emotional. Like the logic doesn't come into play. So I remember going through a period of like a lot of rejection in I think it was 2023 and four. Those weren't fun years for me. And there were, when wins, it got to a point where when I had any sort of win, it could be something super tiny, I would write it on a post-it note and I would like have to document it and make it. And I had it like in my space that I work, just so that when I was really frustrated, I could look back on whatever the win was. And it might not be a financial win, but it could be someone made this introduction or um, a young person made a $25 donation and whatever there was like a story behind it of how much the mission or something that on the program side that was a win too. And I was like, I have to, I mean, yes, I know we need funding to survive, but I tried to remind myself, don't seek validation only from funders. And I think we're so trained to do that. Like, remember the most important validation comes from those you serve and who are in your community. And that kind of helped me build that confidence back up again so I could be in a headspace of positivity. Because ultimately, like when you're having these conversations for resources, yeah, I mean, you need to be honest about what's difficult about the work, but people generally aren't attracted to like depressing energy. Like they want to feel hope and but that's really hard to be in that positive place when it feels like everything's falling apart around you. So those are the kind of mental exercises I did for myself was like writing it down on the post-its, looking at it every day. And then eventually that time passed where it felt like, real dry spell, like no opportunities were coming. And then eventually you just keep trying and one did. And then it turns everything around.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy. Does anyone else want to ask another question? We have about 10 minutes left in the session. If you don't, I will. No? Right. My last question for you, Tammy, is about any advice or resources that you have supported your journey. Like if you have anything off the top of your head, um, maybe one or two books, articles, leaders that have really inspired your journey and you believe that this group might benefit from that.
Mhm. Well, I love reading Stanford Social Innovation Review for like articles. That's been helpful to me over the years. And then in terms of a book, I'll put the title in the chat. Um, my team knows I'm obsessed with this book. I got a copy for everyone on the team. It's called Smart Brevity. One of the challenges I felt we had was that our programs team members were like eyewitness to the impact of the programs and like the best storytellers, but they could tend to be more jargony when writing and um, lose people in really long paragraphs. And this book, whether it was internal or external communications. So I shared this book with everyone, and they started like writing more with like headlines, bullet points, and it just allowed, for externally, allowed what we were trying to communicate to come across in a much more compelling way, and even internally, to avoid, getting lost in unclear information. It helped everyone organize their thoughts better, even if they didn't come from like a communications background. So and that helped when they were communicating with the girls or the cohorts in the programs. So everyone on our staff benefited from that. And then for an organization that has a staff, eventually in the early days, you don't feel it so much because maybe you're working with your closest friends, but as you start hiring people, there's management challenges. And Radical Candor is a book written by Kim Scott that taught me a lot as someone who really doesn't like conflict. Um, you have to have hard conversations in the workplace. And her kind of bottom line that I always remember is that giving feedback, it's important to be clear, kind, and specific. And that has helped me as a manager and supervisor over the years.
Thank you so much. Those are super specific and very helpful. We will search more about them, but I hope those interested in the group do so as well. You had something you wanted to share with the group, right, Tammy?
Yes, everyone here can help Girl Rising win a 25,000 or higher grant simply by clicking vote on a really wonderful girl-made video. This is called Project for Awesome. It's a contest that we have participated in for the last 11 years. And our community has helped us win by just voting on a video. This ends in 1 hour.
1 hour, it
At,
seems. This is
yes.
great.
So all you have to do is vote for charity, hit that button. It's going to ask for your email address. In your email inbox, there's going to be one link to click that brings you back to the page to vote, and you can vote once per email address that you have. It would help us out a lot. And if you want to watch the video, you don't have to, but you'll be very impressed by these two girls.
Amazing. I'm typing in my email right now, so we'll get this.
Thank you.
Hopefully, we've got about 18 more people, so hopefully we can get rally some support towards this, and best of luck with that. And also the next year of transition and journey into this new process of growth for She's the First and Girl Rising as well. Thank you again for making the time and spending this morning with us. We appreciate and deeply value your wisdom of building something and learning from that journey. So thank you, Tammy. Thanks for being here with us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Best
Thank
wishes,
you so
everyone.
much, Tammy.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
We'll see you all in March for our next convening. And have a lovely month ahead, everyone. Take care.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.